Welcome to another live stream, my friends. Bitcoin continues pumping, which is a great sight for sore eyes. We are starting to get closer to the 4-hour resistance zones I've been pointing out for a few days now. So it's time to start being a little cautious, but so far the bulls are looking fairly strong yet. I'm hoping to find some short entries when we hit some of my resistance levels to prepare in case the downtrend continues. However, if the resistance ends up getting broken this time, it may be time to start watching for some bullish STUBER fibs, especially with some altcoins, you guys. As far as right now goes, in my opinion, we really aren't in that great of a spot to take any new swing positions, as we're kind of right in the middle of a 4-hour range. However, there could be some scalp entries before any major levels, much like the STUBER short that I laid out in my Telegram last night, well in advance here. Guys, this is what my Telegram and this channel are all about. No hopium, no fundamental gymnastics, just planning ahead for potential setups, trading the charts for what they are. This trading signal I shared last night had my exact game plan well in advance, you guys. Entries, targets, and invalidation. Without these three things, you do not really have much of a valid setup. So if you want more signals like these, my partners at BloFin are currently giving my followers a sign-up promo for a $300 position airdrop, which will also get you access to my free Telegram channel, where I share more examples of how I pull fibs, clear explanations of powerful market structure, just more of my thoughts on the market in general. So if that interests you, do yourselves a favor, scan the QR code on the BloFin poster in front of you. And yeah, guys, with that, let's hop right back into the 4-hour chart here. Like I said, we are starting to get close to my resistance levels. You can see that we are starting to flirt with the resistance of this MDX Trendmaster indicator. Now, we are even slightly above my lighter blue line here, which is the start of resistance on that indicator, basically. But we do still have a little bit more, real close to 90,000 US dollars, you guys. And the interesting thing about where that lines up with this indicator is that it is just below my 786 on the 4-hour downtrend, right? So this purple box here, that would be my STUBER fib, and my red box up here would be basically my swing fail, fake out, just basically, yeah, fake out liquidity grab zone, that kind of a thing. So often I lay these things out together and I ladder entries into both of them. Guys, there is also a link in the description down below that is more of an educational video about STUBER fibs, kind of goes into the start of how I view them and kind of goes into detail from there. But yeah, guys, like I said, we still do have the 4-hour downtrend, so I don't want to get too excited yet. Yeah, it's been a fantastic rally. I do love to see that Bitcoin is seeing some signs of life here. But again, we just have to be vigilant as we trade into resistance, because quite typically, especially on social media and everything, you're going to see FOMO and, you know, the hopium posts, the ridiculous targets. Just basically everyone's going to celebrate how bullish we are as we enter our resistance pockets. So just something to be a little bit cautious of there. Like I said, though, it is absolutely possible we end up breaking out, right? I don't know for sure what the charts are going to do. Just kind of looking at them for what they are. And so far, the fact that we had this low here and we had this lower low with our last push to the downside, that means we have our confirmed lower high, the highest point between the two, which is currently sitting around 93.2 thousand US dollars. So if we can break that, at that point, I would be willing to accept that, you know, we might be going for a little bit nicer of a bounce, maybe a little more sustained, especially the fact that we are finding support off an important weekly level, right? So the fact that we're still holding my purple box here, that is great to see, and it could end up giving the 4-hour that momentum it needs to end up breaking this downtrend. Now, if we end up breaking that resistance, that doesn't necessarily mean FOMO in right as we break that level, even though it would be a bullish signal, in my opinion. It would be more so waiting for, and this is the hard part that a lot of traders struggle with, is waiting for that proper pullback and that retest, because I'd be looking at something, basically, if we had the structure going for it, I would be looking for some sort of a bullish STUBER fib setup instead of a bearish one on the trend, which has been the case for the last 6 weeks or so. That being said, we don't always get those, right? It's always possible that we just smash through this resistance and we just continue to staircase higher. How I would be looking at that, if we do get that, if we don't just get that break and then come back down for our retest, if we just start staircasing higher, well, then at least we have some sort of a micro trend to play, because as we set higher highs, then we have confirmed higher lows, right? New higher high, new higher low. Obviously, very theoretical at this point, since the chart does not look like that yet. It's just kind of planning ahead where, yeah, just because we miss the lows doesn't necessarily mean that we miss the entire move, right? So ideally, I would see that full pullback to a proper STUBER fib. But as I mentioned, if we start staircasing higher, then I'm going to be looking for these types of setups. Just that, hey, we have a high, higher high. Where are we going to pull back to? That's where I would continue basically chasing the micro trend structure with my fibs, looking for some sort of long setups in that case. But like I said, actually favoring altcoins for that type of a setup. Now, before I get into that too much, one last thing I do want to mention about Bitcoin here before I start diving into some other stuff here is the long short ratio. This is something that I've been watching for, many of my recent live streams, and something that I warned about basically my last couple of streams, is that if retail longs continue to drop and retail shorts continue to build, in that case, that would be a lot of fuel for, rocket fuel, basically. If retail starts aggressively building shorts, they generally get wrecked, and that's where we will see the price continuing to climb. Whereas if we start to see the retail longs start to climb once again, this green line up here, if we start to see those reverse and start climbing again, especially if it happens while we're trading at some important resistance levels, at that point, I would assume that we're going to continue the downtrend. But as long as retail is willing to, basically they finally gave up on long in the dip, right? And that's where we start to see these shorts building. And that's where the price actually gets this little bit of a rally here, because as soon as retail actually gives up on the long side of things, then they're ready to get wrecked the other direction, basically, right? So that's basically something that's important right now. It'll largely depend what retail ends up doing, whether they're going to give rocket fuel if they build shorts, or they're going to add fuel to the fire if they start building longs, basically. So that being said, as I was talking about altcoins and the possibility that we could get some sort of an altcoin season, guys, I mentioned this, was it just yesterday in my yesterday stream before the weekly close there? I had mentioned that on the daily chart, the Bitcoin dominance here, we have a lower trending sell signal on the Bitcoin dominance on the daily chart for the MDX Trendmaster. I take that quite serious. That is the first lower sell signal that we have seen on this indicator for a very long time. Now, it obviously doesn't have to play out, but this is something that I love using this indicator for looking for warnings when a trend is actually reversing. And this is a big reversal warning to me. Again, does not have to play out. If we just end up trending to the upside and basically invalidating this sell signal, well, then that could continue climbing. But as long as we're holding this and basically holding above or below our resistance right here, more specifically, the indicator showing it at about 60% here. If we can hold below that and see this continue getting pushed to the downside from this signal, that's a huge green light for the altcoins, because this is Bitcoin dominance, right? We want to see this drop, because if Bitcoin can end up remaining somewhat healthy, climbing, either trading sideways or even trending upwards a little bit, while Bitcoin dominance is dropping, that would be a strong signal that large players are now basically looking to diversify, looking to get into higher risk assets, looking for basically getting greedy, looking for those higher rewards, because Bitcoin isn't really giving the big ones at this point in the cycle anymore. Even if it trends a little bit higher, in my opinion, the big moves at this point would likely be the altcoins. So obviously we'll have to see everything. I mean, it's just educated guess based on previous market cycles. The last couple market cycles after Bitcoin had topped and we got kind of to the end phase, that's when altcoins were really able to make their move. So if this cycle is going to play out the same, and if we are at that end phase of the cycle, this would absolutely make sense to see this end up dropping and see altcoins go for their last little finale run, whether that's a month or a couple months, a few months, half a year, like a lot of people are saying. You know what? Who knows? But at this point, that is at least a nice sign, as long as we're holding that signal there. A lot of altcoins respecting technicals quite well. Specifically, Ethereum had a nice bullish STUBER on the 5 minute before we started that big pump. So once again, just kind of comparing Bitcoin basically to here, let me just go here. Bitcoin, where we ended up getting our move. What kind of a pump did we get there today? About 4.5%. Whereas Ethereum, where we bottomed out and got our moonshot there, we actually got almost double that, right? We got over 7% to the upside. Solana, I haven't even checked this one yet, but what kind of a pump did Solana get? Even more, we got basically a 9% pump to the upside. So again, I know I've mentioned this quite often in the past that basically if Bitcoin continues trending to the downside, we're likely going to see altcoins do the same. However, at this phase of the cycle, when Bitcoin finds its footing and actually finds some support and starts bouncing or just trading sideways or just being basically healthy would be the best way to put it, but just not looking like total shit. That's where altcoins will really aim to shine, basically. Troll, this is another one that I've been mentioning in my last couple of streams. This one, since this morning, what did we end up getting? This would obviously be a lot higher risk because it's a meme coin and a low cap meme coin at that. But today we had about a 22% pump, right? So those meme coins are always more high risk, especially when they're a low market cap like that, currently sitting at about a $41 million market cap. But nice to see that it's still holding that STUBER fib. It's nice to see that it's actually trying to break that daily downtrend that I've been talking about. That's basically been running since all-time highs. So yeah, guys, I'm just seeing a lot of opportunities in this market, whether it's, possibly, like I said, if the market ends up respecting that 4-hour resistance, I assume everything's going to take a little tumble again, specifically Bitcoin. But, there's a lot of altcoins that are starting to look good. And if retail, like I said, on the retail long short, if retail continues building shorts and being bearish about the market in general, while altcoins are starting to hit support levels, starting to break structure, just starting to look good in general, that would be great for the altcoins for the ending of the cycle, in my opinion. Obviously, I could be wrong about that too, right? Who knows? Maybe I'm wrong and maybe we go into a super cycle. Maybe we get several more years on this bull market. I'm just looking ahead, treating this basically as a typical 4-year cycle, because the 4-year cycle has not broken yet, basically, unless we end up setting a new all-time high. In that case, it'll be broken. But the trend is your friend until the end. So whether that's from a timing perspective, from a chart perspective, whatever, there's just obviously a lot of red flags that Bitcoin could be basically topped for the cycle. But that doesn't mean that all hope is lost. And in my opinion, there would be way more gains to be made in the altcoin market anyways, if it is going to turn bullish. Right. I don't want to be one of those guys who every day says, oh, altcoin season is here, buy now kind of a thing. No, you know what? We have no idea. It's all extremely high risk. I'm just weighing out my odds and actually looking for things in the chart, much like Bitcoin dominance dropping off, and then actually looking for altcoins to be at support, not just YOLOing long into anything because I feel like it's going to go up eventually. Right. We still want to wait for those proper setups. So altcoins will be on my radar a little bit more moving forward. My Aster position still looking fantastic, right? Basically nailed the bottom with that. I can't remember, was it 20x or 25x? I still have 40% of that position running, basically. But yeah, so far so good. I mean, it does have this little mini downtrend, but Aster, honestly, as far as the trends go, it's been one of the better looking trends compared to most coins that I've been looking at recently. I mean, even while Bitcoin was dumping, Aster was just basically trading sideways, if anything, but even to the upside a little bit. And the fact that, just looking at market structure, if this was our low, this was our lower low, this was our lower high. Well, we ended up breaking that, right? So we broke our downtrend. So at this point, even if we do see a pullback on this, I would be very interested in getting into some long positions again at my STUBER fib, as well as the swing fail box. I'd likely be laddering into something along there, or waiting for a lower time frame setup to line up with the larger time frame setup. Basically, get some overlapping, get a STUBER fib inside a STUBER fib. Call it STUBERception. But yeah, altcoins. Lots of nice things happening in the altcoins. Like I said, I think there's a lot of opportunity moving forward, especially if this Bitcoin dominance can continue dropping. Bitcoin on the shorter time frames, just looking at the 5-minute chart here, you guys, still looking not too bad. It looks like we're struggling with some support levels at this point. The fact that we are currently below our pink buy trend here, also lost some microstructure here. However, that being said, we obviously broke this trend of lower trending sell signals, and we are currently still holding the buy here. So even if we end up seeing a little bit of a dump and then we see one of those blue sell signals come in, it will be a significantly higher sell signal, in which case I would be looking for us to basically, like, let's just say it goes something like that. It'll be a blue line in that case. But let's just say the price ends up doing something like this, reclaiming it, and then getting a buy signal that's significantly higher. I would be looking for basically whatever our new local low is at that point. I would be interested in playing the continuation to the upside if we end up getting that. So that's something that I'm going to try and have my eye on this evening. So if I do notice something like that, I will be keeping you guys up to date in the Telegram channel. Let me know in the chat how you guys are doing. Thank you so much for being here once again, my friends. Always appreciate having you guys here. See so many of you guys here day in, day out, every day. Care to hear what I have to say. So it doesn't go unnoticed, guys. I really appreciate that. So thank you. And guys, if you do appreciate these live streams and just coming at you guys with a level head every single day, pretty much, do me a favor, hit that like button. And if you are new here, do yourselves a favor and subscribe to the channel. I know this downtrend, guys, we have been absolutely crushing it. Full disclosure, I mentioned that long position, that short that I ended up taking earlier on Bitcoin, or last night rather. I have also taken a scalp loss today. Basically, I tried reshorting the same thing, but and I also had another one that was at break even, right? Trading isn't always about winning every single trade, but it's also having a systematic trade setup where you can control your losses, right? Not so much that I'm looking at winning every trade, but when those losers come, keeping them small, knowing when to cut your losses and all that sort of thing. So all stuff that I teach in my Telegram, how I look at invalidation levels, how I'm pulling fibs. And that's the exact reason why I love Fibonacci's, you guys. Speaking of that, just looking ahead for something that may happen. I have no idea if we're going to actually get this drop or not. But the fact that we now have a higher sell signal, when we end up getting that next sell signal, it'll be a higher one. I would be looking for, and I don't know if we would get it, but I would be interested in looking for some sort of a long opportunity now with this kind of a fib pull, basically where we ended up breaking out of this little downtrend where we bottomed. Just looking for basically retest of support and using the MDX Trendmaster as confluence for something like that. And that would be a nice size swing there. So again, the one thing I really like about using Fibonacci's, guys, is because all the information is here, right? If we get this set up, I have my entries, I have my take profits, I have my invalidation. It really keeps a lot of the guesswork out of it. It prevents, trading on gut emotions and just, trading, trying to trade your feelings and emotions in general, a very dangerous game. We need something structured. You need some sort of trade setup that you can repeat time and time again in order to be profitable. You can't trade based on gut feelings and be consistent. And with Fibonacci's, I just love that everything is laid out for me. It really helps keep those emotions at bay because it takes the guesswork out, right? Everything is very structured. I have my entries, my profits, my invalidations, and basically go from there, right? So yeah, let me know in the chat how you're all doing. I hope you're all doing fantastic. I hope you guys are absolutely crushing this market. Am I considering Ethereum as an altcoin? Yes, I am. Basically anything other than Bitcoin, I consider an altcoin. Dan Rab, really appreciated the breakdown with the levels and percentages and stop loss and everything. Yeah, that you're talking about this setup that I shared last night here. Yeah, very, very, Well, just very detailed, you guys. Exactly what my entries were going to be. I came so close to getting my third entry on that setup, only got my first two, but then, yeah, basically hit my first two take profits, eventually got stopped at break even on that one. And I don't always have time to break down the entire trade like that, especially when I'm scalping. It's hard to keep up with the chat when I'm scalping because, they can play out very quickly. But yeah, like just basically, this is a perfect example of me running through the exact scenario of how I love to play these STUBER fibs and even the swing fail entries there, right? So how I ladder into my positions, where I'm taking profits, where I'm getting stopped out, all that sort of thing, just to really break down my strategy there. So yeah, if you guys appreciate that, do me a favor, hit that like button. Did a Solana ETF go live today? I'm actually not sure, to be honest. We've had one in Canada for years. Canada usually kind of on the slow side of things when it comes to crypto, but when it comes to ETFs, we've had Ethereum and Solana, and I think even XRP. We have had ETFs for years at this point already. But yeah, nobody cares about that. So as far as America, I'm not sure. I really don't look at fundamentals too much, so I don't really look for those announcements or anything like that. What does the liquidation chart look like on BTC? That's an excellent question because I forgot to look at this. I assume there's a ton of liquidity above us, and there is. However, we are starting to build some below us again. So actually, when we bottomed out here, we basically grabbed all of it, right? This yellow one here is actually a fib. So notice we grabbed every little bit of liquidity that we had below us. And then there was only to the upside. So that's where, again, retail starts shorting. We start to recover and we start to grab some of that liquidity to the upside. But the fact that now we're starting to get closer to our swing resistance, basically, and we're starting to see this liquidity pile up below us, I don't want to rule out the possibility that this downtrend continues. Honestly, it's tough to say. I can't say for sure it's going to continue or it's not going to continue, right? Nobody knows for sure. But as far as playing the chart for what it is, we are still in a downtrend until we take out that lower high resistance at about 93.2K. Until we break that, this is not opinion. This is not emotions. This is just fact that we are in a downtrend until we end up breaking that resistance, basically. Curious how to determine when not to take a position on the break of microstructure on a lower time frame. It would really depend what your risk tolerance is and what size of a position that you want to get out of it. Because I mean, let's say right here, for example, it's probably played out actually. Actually, I don't know if we would have had that one. No, not really. I was thinking that if we ended up having this high and this higher high, this would have been the low point between the two, and that wasn't broken until recently. But I was thinking more something like this. Let's just pretend right now. Let's just pretend. Actually, even something like this. But let's say right here first. Basically looking at this, yeah, it never had the exact structure break that I like, but it did technically get respected as the 786 there. But that being said, if I'm pulling a fib that small, because that's basically, well, yeah, if I see a microstructure break there and I want to look for those entries, those pullback entries, like any typical fib setup, if I pull my range like this, that is where my take profits and my invalidations and entries and everything are, right? So not everybody wants to try and catch a scalp that's small. And that's why I say too that, if I'm really in scalping mode, it's pretty hard to, stay active on posting and explaining absolutely everything if I'm looking at playing really small moves like that. But basically the way I see it is if you pull a fib, if you're looking for a Fibonacci setup like that, if it's this small, that's the range that you've chose to play, right? So the smaller the range, obviously the take profits are going to be much smaller, but also the loss is going to be much smaller if you take it, right? So which was the trade that I ended up taking earlier that lost out. So this was a bit of a momentum play that I ended up taking, but I had mentioned that I was going to update my stop loss to break even really quickly. And that did happen within about 15 minutes or so. I was stopped out at break even on that one. Here is where there was a bit of a nasty, oh no, maybe that, or yeah. And then back here, there was actually something that, where was it? I don't recall exactly where the one was that I ended up taking a loss on. I know it was a really small one, but um, either way, yeah, basically it depends on the person, right? If you have a microstructure break, if the range that you're going to pull is too small and you're not willing to take profits in that range, just, well, maybe then the signal is a little bit too small for you. Or you are willing to accept that this is either going to be a runner or or if it ends up reversing, I'm just willing to take the loss and not even going to take those scalp profits, right? But then that obviously adds a level of risk if you're going to continue doing that. But yeah, ideally you see a much nicer, cleaner break. Like let's say something like this. Let's say even consider this our high, this our higher high, this our higher low. A much better setup would be breaking something like that and then shorting a retest, because at least at that point you have a little bit bigger of a range. You actually have time to get into your, see your entries, your take profits. You actually have something decent there that's a little more than, just covering fees basically. We appreciate you more, Stu. You're the best. Oh, shucks. Thank you. Appreciate having you guys here. Yeah, so as far as the microstructure breaks, there's obviously different ways you can play it. If it's real tight structure and you're willing to just accept the high risk possibility that you take a loss, but it would be very small, then you can look for, those breakout positions or whatever. But other than that, if you have a valid higher low that gets broken, for example, if you want to pull a bearish fib, or you have a lower high, let's say, that's broken, then yeah, basically I would rather have a little more than complete microstructure, but that microstructure is still important, and it usually leads to something a little bigger, right? Like quite often what you'll see is, okay, let's just say at this point, let's say this is our higher low on the trend, right? Because technically we did get above this if this was our high. So here's a perfect example because it's very micro analyzing, right? So here's our high, here's our slightly higher high, and here's our higher high from there. So this is my confirmed very micro higher low, and we have since lost that. It's quite likely, and actually since we lost that, we got back above, dropped again. So now we actually have a new confirmed lower high on the trend. But basically it's quite likely we see something like this happen. And, then, so even though it started with a micro break, we at least got some sort of a trend, in which case I would once again be looking at basically taking a short on the retest of resistance, basically. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. Hopefully I answered your question there. What do I consider a downside target for BTC if the rally flips tomorrow? And I am just going to answer that other question because I see it. Do you favor particular timeframes for trading? 4 hour and 5 minute are actually, yes, those are my favorite. I liked, as far as looking for the trend, I like looking at the 4 hour. That's where I'm kind of looking for my swing levels and stuff like that. But a lot of times if I'm more so scalping or want to really dial in a more specific entry or a more particular entry, that's when I like to look at the 5 minute basically. Considering a downside target for BTC if this rally flips, excellent question. So in that case, I would be pulling my fib basically from that lower high resistance I've been talking about to our current local lows. So you can see again, purple box is my STUBER fib, the red box is my swing fail territory. So basically my targets for a downside move would be basically my first STUBER target, which would be just above 86.9 thousand, basically. That's the zero 0.5 fib. And then the 214 fib for my second STUBER target, which is at approximately 83.3K. From there, I would be basically looking for, well, it depends how it happens. If the resistance does get above into the swing fail territory, I would much more consider this being a new low. And that would basically be my main target. If, however, we just set a lower high and see our rejection from the STUBER fib instead, and we don't break that lower high, then it's possible that we continue running. But basically, the way I treat these STUBER fib setups is basically I take profits on my first quarter at my first target. I take another quarter at my second target. And then generally, I leave about half of my position run. As I mentioned in the one that I took last night, I closed another 10% when we were closer to my double bottom territory. And not this exact fib, but just how I played it was another 10%. So I only left about 40% running. That got stopped at break even. So basically the way I look for my targets is I have my range targets. And after the range plays out, I basically let the position run until that structure ends up breaking again. So let's say we get something like this. I hit some of my short entries and we start trending to the downside again. Basically, I'm going to continue playing the downtrend and hold on to that position until we see something like this, right? If we basically have a lower high that ends up getting broken, something like that, then I would be looking at getting out of basically my entire position, or at least the majority of the remainder of my position. And even considering the possibility for a hedge long if we got some sort of a pullback to support in that case. So that's kind of how I would be playing my targets in that case. A lot of what ifs between now and then, but that's basically how I'm looking at playing it if we get that reversal. Crypto Jacker just got back from walking the dog. Right on, right on. Glad to have you here. But yeah, anyways, guys, I think that's about all I really wanted to go over today. So one last time, if you appreciate these live streams, please do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And just a reminder for those of you interested in learning and seeing more examples of some of my favorite trading strategies, my partners at BloFin are currently giving a sign up airdrop for my followers, which also gets you access to my private Telegram where I share some of my trade setup ideas, how I use Fibonacci's, market structure, give more of my thoughts on the market in general. So yeah, do yourselves a favor, get into my Telegram by scanning the QR code on the BloFin poster on the screen. And with that, I'm out. Stay safe, my friends. Thank you for watching once again. Peace.